Welcome back to another episode of the Even Your Dynasty show. On today's episode, I'm going to do a little bit of a recap on the first half. What I'm going to essentially do is go over my biggest questions entering the season. I had a video earlier this year, prior to the start of the regular season, where I kind of went over the three biggest questions I had for the team. I'm going to kind of revisit that. And then we're going to do a little bit of a second half preview of the team, kind of where they're at, what to expect. Trade deadline's coming up in about 13 or 12 days. So we're going to go over that as well. If you're watching on YouTube, welcome at Even Your Dynasty Show. If you're watching on or listening to us on Spotify, welcome Even Your Dynasty Show there as well. And then drop a follow on X at EYD Show for more, Giants stuff on that platform as well. But to start it off, we're going to go over kind of the recap. The main three questions I had, and we're going to start with the first one, was will the offense score enough consistently? My biggest question mark there was, they had potential. They did some things to upgrade the offense, but there were a lot of question marks as far as how it might flow, how it might fit. Lots of swing and miss in the lineup. A lot of things that they haven't historically been good at manufacturing runs. I wasn't really sure how that would translate, if the power would translate. And I mean, the answer is kind of. They actually rank 15th in runs scored, but it just hasn't had the feel of a consistent offense. They don't do the little things well a lot of times. It's kind of insane because they're 15th in runs scored, and really they should probably be better than that with the amount of opportunities they've created for themselves. So they've been kind of hit or miss. Hopefully we get a little bit more consistency. I think there are some things that they can do to address the offense, mainly getting guys like, Wilmer Flores out of the lineup consistently, moving off of him. I've had some thoughts on moving guys like Thairo Estrada, who I know it's not the most popular move, but really he's not been a good offensive player for outside of about a month or a month and a half last season. He's nice, but he's just not a consistent producer on the offensive side of the ball. So there's a few moves I think they could make to try and improve the offense, but as a whole, it's definitely not been the biggest problem on this team. I think the pitching staff is very clearly a bigger issue, at least in the first half it was. So, and that's going to kind of lead us into the second question, which was, can the pitching staff hold up into June? Now, my main question was if they could hold up into June, because they had talked about Cobb being back by June. I think the expectation was Snell would have been built up by then. And then all of a sudden, Keaton Winn just implodes. And then he can't stay healthy. Snell can't stay on the field. Cobb has a bunch of setbacks. Robbie Ray is still not expected back till the All-Star break. So all of a sudden, it got stretched out from can they hold up into June and to all the way to can they hold up into the second half, which I think it's a resounding no. I mean, the pitching staff, frankly, has been bad. The bullpen's been bad to an extent, but part of the issue with the bullpen is, you look at it, and I think now the group is a pretty solid group, but you look at the pen as a whole, and it still has, a lot of Kai Tang dragging the numbers down, Dalton Jeffries, Spencer Howard, guys like that are kind of dragging the numbers up a little bit. And Luke Jackson, of course, who is somehow still on this team. But, a lot of things like that where guys are kind of dragging the numbers up a little bit. But I think they've settled into a pretty good bullpen, but it's also been overused because they've been having to do all these bullpen games because the starting rotation just could not hold up. And, I like Jordan Hicks signing. I liked it. It was, he had a good first month or month and a half. He's hit a wall. He's not a starter. Wynn is not a starter. I'll backtrack on Hicks. I think he could be a starter next season. He needs, going into next season where his arm's a little bit more stretched out than it was going into this season, I think will help him. So I'm willing to give him another look next season, but it's trending towards he needs to be in the bullpen like that. And I think this season, the rest of the way, he needs to be in the bullpen. But yeah, Keaton Wynn's not a starter. Harrison had the little minor injury, and he's been pretty inconsistent. Some of the young guys, Birdsong has had his moments. He's looking solid, but Mason Black came up, really struggled. I mean, you really have had one legitimate starter, and that's Logan Webb. And I don't even think I mentioned Blake Snell, who took until his last two starts to really do anything productive. And his last two starts have been excellent, and he's looked really good. So it kind of gives you some hope going into the second half. But the first half, which was the question, has been a disaster for the staff. And the crazy thing is the offense has been inconsistent, but if the pitching staff could have just been a right around average, I mean, this team likely would be 4 or 5 games over 500 and in the playoff hunt, and possibly in that third wild card spot. I mean, they're still technically in the hunt. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but it's just been kind of a tough watch with this team, with the pitching. So the last question I had during that video was which young players will step up and give you confidence going into 2025. And I think when I made that video, it felt like, Luis Matos was likely to be a guy. Patrick Bailey, I still had questions about, but I felt like he would have an opportunity. And then maybe a guy like Casey Schmidt. And really, it's been outside of Bailey, who stepped up and he looks good. And yes, I'm critical of Patrick Bailey, his defense at times. Where yes, I get it. He's a Gold Glove potential, Gold Glove caliber. However you want to look at it. I would like to see him be more dependable on the basic stuff and just at least use proper mechanics when he's blocking balls. But I'm not going to go into that on this one. But Patrick Bailey stepped up. But it kind of crazy, couple kind of afterthought players have really stepped up, for position player groups. And that's Elliot Ramos, obviously, who just is coming off an all-star game appearance. Brett Wisely, Mr. Savannah Banana himself, has been awesome. He's really, in my opinion, made Thairo Estrada expendable. And then you go into the bullpen and you have guys like Randy Rodriguez, who looks really good. Eric Miller, who looks really good. So you have a couple young guys there. A couple guys from last year have stepped it up too. Ryan Walker looks like he might be closing games soon. And then, into the rotation, Harrison has been a bit up and down. I still feel fine about him as a starter, but Birdsong has come in and flashed and looked really solid at times. So it's a good thing for the future because you have significantly more people. They'll have significantly more young players going into next season than they did going into this season. That I think you enter the season feeling really good about them as players, especially with Bailey, Ramos, Wisely, and then hopefully another young outfielder. But they've really invested heavily in the outfield in the draft, so that's going to create kind of a interesting dynamic here in the next 2 years. I think where there's going to be a lot of competition for very few spots in that outfield. And I'm here for it because I think the competition's good. I think players are going to understand that if they don't take advantage of their opportunities, they are probably going to end up on another roster or in another organization before too long because there's going to be a bunch of guys vying for those spots. But yeah, I mean, and then, I didn't even mention Jung Hoo Lee, who obviously got injured in May, which stunk. I think we were all looking forward to a whole season of him, but you do feel good about him. He is a young player, so I'm gonna add him to that list. But those were the three that's my recap of the first half. I don't want to go too crazy into that. We've already talked kind of ad nauseum about the first half of the season on different live shows and things like that. So you can find that on some of the previous videos. But now we're going to kind of take a step forward and we're going to look at the second half. And currently where the Giants stand, they're 47-50. With 65 games left. They're 3 games back in the third wild card. There are 4 teams ahead of them, as well as they're tied with the Reds right now. So they're in kind of a cluster. I mean, it's a tight race. They're a bit of a cluster. There are 11 games before the trade deadline. The trade deadline is on July 30th at 3 p.m. Pacific time. So upcoming, and I'm bringing this all up because Farhan Zaidi said it's up to the players. Like they can either go on a run for 2 weeks and make us buy, or they can, force their hand into selling, which, I mean, he's not necessarily wrong. It is, at the end of the day, it does come down to the players. My issue with it is, Farhan, you created a deeply flawed roster. Don't try and punt the blame. Like, he created this roster that myself and many others said was flawed before the season. It didn't mean they couldn't be successful, but you can't get a bunch of swing and miss power guys in this ballpark, have no speed, have not enough back control in the lineup, and can't be able to. You're not incapable of manufacturing runs. A bunch of injured pitchers. Like, there were just a lot of things that he did that the warning signs were there, I guess is the best way I can put it. But they do have 11 games. And now 3 of them are in Colorado, 4 of them in LA, and then 4 at home against Colorado. And then they'll have a day off, and then they have a 2-game series against Oakland that, the first game doesn't start till 6:45, so it's after the deadline. So they have 11 games that will be played between now and the deadline. I mean, you have to win at least 6, like minimum. And really, they're starting to get to the point where they're getting kind of the easier part of their schedule. They really need to win more than that. Like, frankly, they kind of need to go about 7-4 in that 11 game stretch, get back to 500, in my opinion, if they really want to heavily consider buying. I don't I don't agree that they should be out there actively buying. If they're an under 500 team, I don't think that's the play. But it is a Colorado has always given the Giants issues. So that first series could be tough. And then the 4 at home, or 4 on the road in LA, that's going to be tough. I mean, regardless of what we think of LA's pitching, and they're without Mookie Betts and all this stuff, they need to find a way to win 2 of those games. I think if they can find a way to win 2 of those, I really do think they could go 5-2 against Colorado in the 7 games, and you can be well positioned to buy at the deadline. They'll probably be like 2 games out of the wild card at that point, and you can push your chips in a little bit. I don't want to see them go insane. I don't want to see them go trade a guy like Eldridge. Obviously, they just drafted Tibbs, but I don't want to see some of these big time prospects going. There are guys that I'm open to, mainly some of their left-handed pitching prospects, because they're so heavy on those. So you're looking at guys like Whisenhunt, even Harrison. I get it. We like Harrison, but I'm not opposed to possibly moving him. Reggie Crawford, Joe Whitman. I like Whitman the most of the group. I'd actually personally like to not see them trade Whitman, but they have some options there. You also have guys like Marco Luciano, who the team doesn't seem to know what to do with. So I'm not necessarily opposed to him. I'm not saying sell low on him. He's finally heating up, which is good. I would love to see the team figure out where to play him and let him develop, but they seem to not have any clue where they need to play him. So it's kind of a tough situation. It just might be time to, sell high on the guy. Even a guy like Luis Matos, who I think anybody that's listened to my show knows I am extremely high on Luis Matos. I really like him as a player. I would like to see him get an everyday opportunity and just get the ability to grow at the major league level. But this team is now investing heavily in outfielders. So at some point, you may need to move some. And with Ramos establishing himself, Lee taking up center field, and then you draft a guy that is expected to move through the system quickly in James Tibbs, Matos might be a guy that they look to move. And they have a couple guys, Bishop and McRae, sitting in AAA right now. Now, are either of them ready? And Gerard Encarnacion, for instance, is having a really good year down there. Now, are those guys ready? Probably not, but you guys get where I'm going with this, where it's like it's suddenly going to get a little bit crowded in the outfield amongst players. So he could be a guy that, he's a former top 100 prospect as recent as last season. The only reason he's not on that list now is probably because he aged, or because he passed his, rookie limit. So they remove him off those lists. So he's a guy that they could look potentially into moving. So they have quite, a lot of people that they can move without kind of dipping into those top You guys like Bryce Eldridge. So we'll see kind of what ends up out there. I don't want to speculate too much on players that may be available. As you guys know, I'm very high on making a move for Bo Bichette and taking the chance. But outside of that, I'm not going to go into too many details on who may or may not be available because, frankly, I'm not really sure who's actually selling right now. But now let's kind of speculate the other way. If they go the opposite direction, let's say they go into those 11 games, they go 5-6 or 4-7 or something like that. They have just a brutal stretch and they get forced to sell. Who is the organization going to look to trade? Which I think there's a couple tiers of this. There's the veterans that I think make a ton of sense that they would move. And a few of them don't have a ton of value, but they have the veterans that would make sense to trade. Guys like Michael Conforto, who's on the last, half season of his deal. He would be an easy guy to probably move. He's having a decent season. He's been playing well recently. He obviously has some nice power. A team that needs an outfielder would probably be interested in that. You get like a middle of the road, middle tier prospect, someone in like a team's 10 to 15 range, more than likely for him. Thairo Estrada, I've said, because of the emergence of Brett Wisely, actually makes a ton of sense to move. I think Wisely's better suited to be at second base anyway. And even if you like Brett Wisely at shortstop, you want to keep him there. Marco Luciano's looked better at second base than he has at short in the last month or so. You could keep Marco at second, call him up, give him a look. Or you can bring Casey Schmidt up, try and let his bat establish. Because, you're going to be playing the young guys if you start selling players off. So, bring up a Luciano or a Schmidt, let them see if they can figure it out over the last 60 games or 50. It would be like 50, 55 games at that point. And, see what you have going into 2025. Tyler Rogers is a guy that I think you get a decent prospect for. He's been a very reliable reliever, but he's a guy that you probably could get a decent prospect for if you move him. I think probably a guy in like a 8 to 12 range on a team's top 30. So Lamont Wade would be a guy you could potentially look to move. I don't think they would. I think they would hold on to him. He's got one more year left on his deal. Given the contract situation, I think he makes sense to look into moving in a deal if you're going to sell off. But I just don't think they will, just because they are going to try and compete in 2025. And he's a guy that'll help them. A couple guys that don't have a ton of value, but you might move. Mike Yastrzemski's one. He's going to have less value than Conforto, but he doesn't have like no value. He's been playing pretty solid for a couple months now. So you probably be able to get at least an okay prospect, middle tier prospect for him. And then Wilmer Flores would be kind of a Austin Slater situation. You're just going to dump him you'll eat most of his deal, the couple million that he's owed. And a team will give you some low level prospect or a depth piece that ends up in Sacramento, like you got back for Austin Slater. So it'd be a situation like that. And then the guys that you could, you have the option guys that are kind of weird situations where maybe you could trade them, but I don't think they would, because they either have interest in re-signing or they're probably going to opt in. And that's guys like Blake Snell or Matt Chapman. I think in Chapman's case, the team loves him and they're going to try and bring him back next season. Blake Snell is, 10 days ago, I'd have said, or 15 days ago, I'd have said there's zero chance of him opting out. Well, he just went 12 scoreless innings his last two with like 2 hits allowed in that stretch, and has been pretty dominant. So if he maintains that for the last 2.5 months, then yeah, there's a chance that he still just opts out. Even though the numbers won't be great on the season, he may still opt out because teams will look at what he just did in the second half. And once he got healthy and right, and I could see him thinking he can get a bigger deal. And then the last one is Camilo Doval, who I'm kind of over him as a closer. It's not to do with his stuff. To me, the stuff is clearly there. I'm not a big fan of the way that he is so kind of nonchalant. There's like no urgency when he's on the mound. He doesn't hold runners. He walks too many guys. He's got pitch clock issues. It's always something with Camilo, and it's stuff that really, to me, it shouldn't be the case. Like, it's all the little things that just add up with him. And now I'm not advocating to trade him for nothing. Like, I'm not saying just like get him off my roster or anything like that. But what I am saying is if a team offers you a top 50 or top 75 prospect, I'd probably move him. I would feel just fine with that and take a chance on a very high level prospect. He's the guy that probably you could get the best return for. Outside of, that might reasonably be moved. Not, obviously you could trade Logan Webb and get a king's ransom probably for him. But for the guys that might reasonably be traded, Camilo makes the most sense to me. So those are the guys that I could see the team maybe moving off of if the season goes south. But I think, as all of you know, like, my stance is I think this team could be good in 2025. I made a whole video on why it felt like the team was focused on 2025. And my feelings towards that have only gotten stronger with the emergence of guys like Brett Wisely and Elliot Ramos and some of these bullpen pieces. And a guy like Hayden Birdsong coming up and looking like he's not in over his head. All these little things that kind of add up where I go, this team could be good in 2025. And especially if Snell ends up opting in and you end up with Chapman and Snell another year, your pitching staff, suddenly you have Logan Webb, Snell, and Ray right at the top. And then, the bottom two spots, we'll see. Harrison probably would be taking up one of those spots. I would love to see Hayden Birdsong take up the other, get Hicks in the bullpen, and all of a sudden you have just a really solid 1 through 5, and then you'll actually have the depth that you need when you have guys like Tristan Beck, hopefully healthy again, being that kind of glue guy in the pen that can fill multiple roles. You have the emergence of Miller, Rodriguez, Walker. You still have one more year of Taylor Rogers. Camilo may or may not still be in the pen at that point. Like, I think the pitching staff as a whole could be really good. And then you can go out and try and sign a guy like a Ha-Seong Kim or something like that. That would help bring some speed and different elements to your game. And this is where I would love to see the team go make a move for a star, whether that's Bo Bichette or an outfielder that's, potentially on the market, because they could be well equipped for 2025 to be just a damn good team and a team that feels like, barring injuries, it finally feels like, okay, this team's going to be an 86 or 87 plus win team, and maybe better. If injuries obviously hit, could be worse, but like you feel confident in that roster being really good, as opposed to before the year. It felt like, I was kind of optimistic that they get more out of guys like Jorge Soler and things like that. But, it felt like before the year, it could really go multiple different directions. I think we all thought the pitching would get healthy earlier, and they didn't. So, but that's kind of where I'm at. That's the little bit of a preview for the second half, what to expect. I think there's potential that we're going to see a lot of the young guys, unfortunately. Hopefully they come out hot. I'd like to see them make some moves. I would definitely be looking to move a guy like Thairo Estrada, kind of regardless of if they are in the hunt or not. I think that you could trade for a shortstop, move Wisely to second, and then trade Thairo and just recover a little bit of the assets. It's nothing personal with the guy. I don't like his approach. Everybody gets on Casey Schmidt, and Thairo has been doing the same thing for 3 years and no one says anything. I just think Brett Wisely just gives you more quality at bats, and he gives you about the same level defense at second base. So that's just my opinion on that. Let me know what you guys all think. As always, if you enjoy this content, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Go Giants. This will probably be my last one for this week. I am currently on vacation making these videos, and we'll post more next week as the season gets going, and we'll go back to doing the live shows again next week. The internet service or connection here wasn't particularly great, so I didn't want to hop in and it just be a bad experience for everybody. So we'll get the lives going again next week. But thanks for joining me, everybody. Catch you all next week, and go Giants.